I recently came across someone's online musings about what they called IRL podcasts, or in real life podcasts. They wrote, I've been thinking a lot about IRL podcasts. Bring a few friends together, no mics, nothing is recorded. Have a free-form discussion, can even have food and drinks. Has anyone tried this? Someone else reshared his post with the snide remark, Tech Bro just discovered hanging out. Of course, the internet had itself a good laugh over this, and I admit, so did I. Now, I'm not totally convinced that Tech Bro wasn't making that joke himself to begin with, but if it was sincere, it strikes me as quite profound, actually. We just might be in a moment where hanging out needs to be discovered, defined, or invented. For so many reasons that you have perhaps observed, hanging out and having a relaxed, meandering conversation with friends seems to be becoming more and more of a rarity in our world. Strangely, we might need to frame it as an IRL podcast without microphones in order to appreciate its value and power, to give it its proper due. Setting aside for a moment the external factors which really do prevent us from hanging out, things like economic pressures, family responsibilities, and our car-centric infrastructure, let's talk about the internal reasons that we don't do it. The attitudes, the hang-ups, and the fears. Some of us might see hanging out as a luxury we can't afford as adults saddled with responsibilities. Others might even view it as a poor use of time. Still others might think of it as a frightening and risky prospect, one in which we would have to give up too much control of our time and our experience. A lot of our socializing now takes place online or via text, virtual places where we can maintain our sense of control over our time and experience. Either that or it takes place at work, places where we might as well socialize. Sometimes we might go out with friends to a noisy bar or a loud concert, places where we always have an exit strategy and where there's no shortage of distraction should the conversation falter. For many of us, the mere thought of sharing unstructured, open-ended, undirected, and undistracted time, even with close friends, is enough to send us into a panic, whether from social anxiety or from the pressure we feel to be productive at all times, or if not productive, then sufficiently distracted. Today we're talking about good old-fashioned hanging out, why we need it, and why we don't do it. I'm Ellen Riccio, and this is First Creatures. It's kind of funny that I would be making a podcast about hanging out, because hanging out wasn't really something I did much of until relatively recently. Then again, Converts are the most zealous evangelists, usually. You might say I had a slight allergy to hanging out prior to my early 30s or so. I mean, I was sociable before that. I could joke around and shoot the breeze with the best of them. Well, maybe not the best of them, but I was pretty good at it. But I could only do this as long as there was some other reason for us all to be together. Like if we were in a study group, or music rehearsal, or sports practice, or if I was in a situation where people were more or less stuck with each other, say between classes, or while traveling, or during a lunch break. But without some sense of purpose or situational necessity, I'd get very antsy. I remember the summer after my first year of college, I went to a music camp in western North Carolina that kept us busy all day with lessons, classes, and orchestra rehearsals. Then at night, there was often a party at one of the student cabins, to which I did not go. I hadn't gone to parties during my first year at college either, partially because I didn't drink and was still gripped by a middle schooler's fear of succumbing to peer pressure. But more so, I didn't go to parties because I didn't understand them. I didn't see the point. I remember asking one of my partying friends at that camp with all sincerity, "So, what do you do at a party? Just, talk?" He laughed so hard that he could barely get out the words, "Yeah, we talk." I didn't know what was so funny about that. I could not wrap my head around being in a room with a bunch of people just talking. A few years later, with college in my rearview mirror, I was at a training session where the facilitator asked us all to reflect on what our most cherished memory from college had been. For some reason, she chose me to break the ice and share my answer with the group, a decision she later came to regret. Unsure of what else to do, I told the truth. My college had been a classical music conservatory, and I recounted for the group in great detail a concert I'd attended during my freshman year that changed my life. And it really did. It altered the direction of my life. When I was done sharing this rather personal and sincere autobiographical detail, the facilitator turned to the rest of the group and said, "Okay, well, most people say their most cherished memories from college are the friendships they formed." Turns out there had been a right answer, and I was way off. Once I landed a full-time job, my friends were work friends. We hung out at lunchtime and occasionally after work. Then I started a small nonprofit, and my friends were my nonprofit friends. We had meetings, often at my house, where I would make dinner for everyone, and we would get stuff done, but it was also kind of a riot. Then I stepped down from my position at the nonprofit, and the built-in reason to hang out with these friends was gone. This is really common, I think. People form really close friendships at work, and then when they leave that job, they rarely talk to those friends anymore, because, ironically, they're too busy with their new jobs and their new work friends. Work friendships are the ultimate situationships. Often they arise out of a situation that's less than ideal because it's work, so you share a common struggle. There's always plenty to talk about. Besides, there's a good chance you spend more time with them than with your own family. That's just how it is. Work friendships check both boxes for non-allergenic hangout time. First, you're kind of stuck together. You're just making the best of a situation. And second, you're getting something else done while you're at it. You can have fun and not feel a lick of guilt. I'm not saying that work friendships aren't somehow real relationships. Yes, it's true that many of them fizzle out once proximity is no longer in their favor. But some relationships don't last your whole life, and that's okay. What I am saying, though, is that there's a different quality of experience that is possible when people choose to spend time together for no purpose beyond spending time together. And I'll take it a step further. There's also a different quality of experience that becomes possible when people have committed to spending a significant amount of time together. To recognize this, all you have to do is think of the difference between a kind of conversation that I'm sure we've all had, one between people who have run into each other on the street, their bodies still half pointing in the direction they were originally going, their thumbs still hovering over their phones ready to continue a search or a text, being careful not to ask any questions or give any answers that would prolong the encounter, and compare that with the conversation, which I hope we've all had, between people who have put down their belongings, sat down, and turned toward each other. Time is an ingredient, a factor that we have so many clever ways of shortchanging, bypassing, substituting, or eliminating altogether in our modern world. There's so much pressure to be efficient or just downright fast that, unfortunately, in so many aspects of our lives, quality gets sacrificed. And to bring it back to episode 2 for a moment, our dulled senses are often what allow these sacrifices to be made without too much fuss from us. We don't detect the lowness of the quality, or at least we don't imagine it could be all that big of a deal. But time is the difference between sautéed onions and caramelized onions, between a helpful hamstring stretch and a detrimental one, between a shallow exchange and a deep conversation. We have received this idea that quality is what matters when it comes to our relationships. That phrase, quality time, first became popular in the 1970s, and it's a concept that supported the emerging ideal of having it all. Aimed at working parents, the idea was that even if you only have 5 minutes to spare before running out the door to go to work, you can still give your spouse or your child 5 minutes of your undivided attention, and that that's worth more than an hour of distracted proximity anyway. Of course, there is wisdom in this. The problem is that I think we've convinced ourselves that by simply burning our undivided attention into our partner's eyeballs for a few minutes, we can actually produce and enjoy a morsel of the same feeling of love and connection that comes from spending a relaxed afternoon with them. We've convinced ourselves that we can apply to our relationships the same terrible efficiency we wield in other aspects of our lives. To discredit this idea, all we have to do is imagine being on the receiving end of such deft time management. Let's say you've got something on your mind and it's not easy to put into words. Or maybe it involves a brief yet troubling incident with an epic backstory, and your partner or your friend asks you what's wrong. What kind of answer are you going to give if they just called you while driving from point A to point B? Or even if they're physically there and dropped everything to hold your hand and look you in the eye, but you know that they have to leave in 5 minutes. Your answer will be partial at best, if not downright dishonest. A key ingredient, if not a couple key ingredients, was missing if this was to be a moment of real connection. So, quality is important, but the quantity of time has its own mysterious effect on quality. If you've ever done yin yoga, you've experienced this firsthand. In the yin style, you do many of the same poses that you do in other styles of yoga, say pigeon pose or a forward fold, only you hold one pose for several minutes. The first minute or two is kind of uncomfortable, to say the least. But if you can manage to stay still, something eventually shifts in your body. It's subtle. It's like a softening, and you find yourself sinking a little bit deeper into the pose without even trying. There's no way to rush this. To me, it feels almost like my body doesn't quite trust me at first. But after a couple of minutes, trust is established, and the body acquiesces. A little over a year ago, I spent a few days in Paris with a small group of friends from home. Everyone had things they wanted to do and see: museums, the Eiffel Tower, shopping. But we all agreed that we didn't want to try to pack too much into the trip, and that the most important thing was to take it easy, to be a little less American about it and a little more French. The first full day, everyone was so jet-lagged that we didn't get to a cafe for breakfast until about 1 p.m. We sat at a table on the sidewalk, soaking up the rare February sunshine and ordering espressos. 2.5 hours later, breakfast completed, we determined that the only thing we could hope to do with the remainder of the day was to go to this one museum that was open late. But first, we had to go back to the Airbnb because someone forgot their sunglasses. Well, we got a little comfortable at the Airbnb, settling into the plush couches and thoroughly enjoying one another's company. More than once, somebody brought up the fact that we should probably get going if we wanted to make it to the museum, and everyone nodded in agreement, but then the topic changed and we all stayed put. Once the sun had set behind the Eiffel Tower, we finally accepted the fact that we were not going to the museum. And instead of figuring out where to go for dinner, all 5 of us went down the block to the nearest grocery store, where we picked out whatever looked interesting to us and brought it back to the apartment. Then we sat down around a long table and, course by course, as if it was the fanciest meal in the world, we sampled various French lettuces, cheeses, crackers, biscuits, yogurts, potato chips, and custards. I poured wine and sparkling mineral water for everyone to cleanse the palate between courses. After a couple of hours like this at the table, we retired to the living room area, where we chatted, ensconced in those comfy couches, until approximately 2 a.m., at which point I realized that we had been talking for 13 hours. That's not something we ever could have or would have done at home. I don't think it's something we would have thought possible if we hadn't just done it. You'd think we would have run out of things to talk about, or that the more introverted among us would have tried to escape at various points. But no, it was one of the most pleasant days I can remember. The conversation flowed in a gentle spiral pattern. We told stories, we got silly, we got serious, we shared personal things, we discussed cultural phenomena, and certain themes would come up over and over again. But each time we were a little more relaxed, a little more comfortable with each other, and we could go a little bit deeper. By midnight, we were sharing things we had never shared before. The next few days were similar, although we did actually go out and do things. But the conversation, the hanging out, the being together for hours on end, allowing ourselves to relax and unwind, that was the real treat. Each other was the delight. We laughed about the fact that it's almost impossible to find a night when we can all have dinner together back at home. And yet here we were, spending every waking hour together in Paris. Must we cross an ocean in order to spend this kind of time together? Priya Parker says no. In her fantastic and inspiring book, The Art of Gathering, she describes a kind of event she somewhat inadvertently co-created with her husband when the two of them moved to New York together. They agreed that they didn't want to get stuck going to the same 2 or 3 neighborhoods all the time, and that they wanted to intentionally explore the city. So they decided that every once in a while, they would spend an entire day checking out a new part of town. To begin, they chose Harlem. A friend got wind of their plans and invited herself. Then she invited one of her friends. On the appointed day, the 4 of them met up at a church, ate at a diner, walked 40 blocks south, dropped in spontaneously on a friend, went to a museum, happened upon a dance party, and eventually parted ways around 7 p.m. They had such a great time, they decided to do it again. Then they did it again, Eventually, different people started coming, people that Priya Parker didn't even know. So she decided to set a few ground rules so people knew what to expect. They were as follows. First, if you're going to join, be there from start to finish, all 10 to 12 hours. Second, turn off technology. Third, agree to be present and engaged in the group and what's going on. Fourth, one conversation at meals, no side conversations. And finally, be game for anything. The two most influential rules turned out to be committing to the full day and the technology ban. To most of us, the thought of promising to spend 10 to 12 hours with a small group of people is terrifying. But as Priya Parker discovered, there is an unexpected reward for making this scary commitment. Strangely, if you know you have to come on time and stay the entire time, you can actually relax in a way that will surprise you, because you're not preoccupied with the decision of when or whether you should make your exit. As Parker puts it, you're essentially giving up on the option of finding a better option. You are here, not anywhere else. This, together with the fact that people were not allowed to check Instagram intermittently throughout the day, led the group to dub these events I Am Here Days. It's really fun to read about all the adventures Priya Parker and her friends had on these I Am Here days. But what I really love is Parker's description of what happens between people when they spend this much time together. This is an excerpt from the audiobook The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, read by Bernadette Dunn and published by Penguin Random House Audio.
We discovered from these experiments that spending 12 hours together as a group is fundamentally different from spending 4 hours together on 3 separate occasions. The longer you're together, the more reality sets in. You can only chit-chat for so long. People, including you, get tired and cranky. Walls start to come down. By the time late afternoon arrives, people begin sharing stories of their past, of their struggles with money, parents, religion, topics that don't always come up easily. And it was these conversations that truly mattered and made me feel less alone. I realized that there were others in the city who had left the homes they knew in pursuit of adventure, but who, like me, treasured their families. That there were others who experienced setbacks in their work and wanted to talk about them, but who, like me, didn't always want to be discussing work. That there were others who worried about money, but who, like me, didn't want it to keep them from taking risks. And most simply, that there were busy New Yorkers who were not only willing, but also hungry to slow down and savor time with friends and even strangers.
Near the end of our Paris trip, I told my friends about Priya Parker and how it was possible to choose to spend an inordinate amount of time with friends without making such a grand gesture as flying to another country, and they liked this idea. We decided we should give it a try when we got back home. At the time of this recording, however, we're still trying to coordinate our schedules. At the end of that first I Am Here day in Harlem, Priya Parker and her friends were surprised to find that they were not only relaxed and peaceful, but that they were also energized, despite having walked so much and expended so much energy. I, too, have often been surprised by the same phenomenon. I'm normally a very responsible professional person. If I have to go to work in the morning, I go to bed at a reasonable time, believing a good night's sleep to be absolutely crucial to the next day's mood, state of mind, and energy level. But occasionally, this theory gets debunked. Like when, several years ago, two old friends from my college days made a significant detour on their cross-country trip just so they could visit me. We hadn't seen each other in years, so even though I had an early morning ahead, I stayed up late talking with them. When I woke up the next day, just a few hours after going to bed, I was surprised to find that I felt more alive and energized than I had in weeks. It made no sense. I was sure I'd be groggy, maybe even regretting my choices. But it was as if these two dear friends of mine had refilled my spirit tank. I don't know how else to describe it. I just felt good about life. Maybe you've had this experience too. I hope so. I'm not sure if it matters whether you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert. I think we all have people who drain our energy and people who give us a boost. That boost, or refill of the spirit tank, as I called it, has actually been confirmed scientifically. It's chemicals being released in your brain, including dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. These chemicals make us feel pleasure, increase our tolerance of pain, both physical and emotional. They stabilize our mood, regulate our sleep-wake cycle, and support our overall well-being. I still like to think of it as refilling the spirit tank, though, because you can take pills that will create a similar effect in your brain, that will increase pleasure and pain tolerance, that will regulate your sleep and stabilize your mood. But a pill won't provide happy memories of the conversation you stayed up until 3 a.m. having. A pill is no substitute for the belly laughs, the look on your friend's face when you told them a great story, the encouraging words they offered by candlelight. When I woke up that next morning, I'm sure I still had these hormones coursing through my bloodstream, making me feel like $1,000,000. But the afterglow continued for the whole day, and even now, years later, I still smile when I think about that night, and it makes me feel good. Of course, the advantage of taking a pill, as well as the advantage of the famous dopamine hit we get from social media, is that there's not much risk involved. There's no chance of feeling awkward, or being put on the spot, or feeling bored and trapped. These are some of the anxieties around socializing that can sometimes become outsized in our minds, I think. It's the fear of friction, of ambiguity, of failure, even. These fears can be nothing short of crippling for some people. But then there are others of us for whom they're more like a toe blister than an incapacitating condition. We can be very persuasive when convincing ourselves that we're just not up to going, that we simply cannot handle a social situation because of these fears. But mercifully, we sometimes get proven wrong and end up feeling way better. I should mention that I'm still not crazy about parties, the kind where you show up and you don't know half the people and you're supposed to just figure out where to go and what to do with your hands for 2 hours. Clearly, some people thrive in this kind of environment. But if you aren't a party animal, I think it's still worth it to seek out and even build structures within which you and your closest friends or friend can just hang out for a while. In other words, I think it's both necessary and worth it for many of us to reinvent and initiate hanging out. Like Priya Parker, I found that it helps to define a gathering, to name it, even set a few ground rules so that people know what to expect. We should recognize that our world is going through a huge shift, discarding cultural norms, traditional social structures, and rules of etiquette, and that a natural result of such upheaval is that people don't always know what to do anymore at a gathering. So spelling it out can be an act of kindness. I've invented, if you will, a few different ways of hanging out over the years, setting up little structures, my own spins on IRL podcasts, that allow me to connect with people I love and people I'd like to get to know better. Something that has struck me in the last several years since converting to being a person that hangs out is how rare it is these days to have a conversation one-on-one, face-to-face with a friend. Business associates, clients, colleagues, coworkers, sure. But friends? We somehow find it hard to justify. It's difficult for us to commit so much time to something that isn't going to check anything off our to-do list and that isn't going to move our lives forward in some way. We'd rather just hang on to the stone if it's only going to kill one bird. But here's the thing. Leisure, in this case, a relaxed conversation with a friend, is actually how we grow and change. It's when we realize new things about ourselves and about life. We gain a new perspective. It's how we get a grip, not to mention a higher tolerance for emotional pain. This is not insignificant. So the next time you feel like you have to justify spending time with a friend, I want you to remember this quote from philosopher Byung-Chul Han. He says, "The incapacity for leisure is precisely a sign of inertia." Inertia, of course, is the tendency to do nothing or to remain unchanged. Our slight allergy to hanging out may just be the fear of growth, of change, of discovery. So, in your own way, be countercultural and hang out with your friends. Support for First Creatures comes from our listeners. Monthly donors will receive a First Creatures car magnet, a monthly letter from me, and a special shout-out on the show. Speaking of which, I want to thank our newest supporters, Justin Williams, Ruben Musgrave, and Cheryl Marshak. I'm so grateful for you. To learn more and to find out how you can support the podcast, visit firstcreatures.com. Thanks for listening.